Hmm.
because many of us really have come from a place where we did have some difficulty with relationships that were meant to be loving.
Hmm.
And when we've had those kinds of trauma with regards to those close, intimate relationships,
Hmm.
we become quite dysregulated and we get triggered. The very idea of intimacy may be a trigger. Now, intimacy is really a very powerful topic because this is about human connections. This is about
Hmm.
how we really come to understand that, yes, we are empowered beings, but this is a relational universe. All the things that we need to achieve at work, at home, at play, it's really about the relationships that we build. And how
Hmm.
do we deepen this intimacy? Because this is how we really get that sense of fulfillment. There is not just the physical intimacy, there's the emotional, the psychological, and the spiritual benefits of intimacy. And really, the question I'm going to ask you, Shelby, today is why do we need intimacy? Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Daily Soul Bytes Show. My name is bolaabimbolaauthor. I am your host, and this is the show where we interview expert authors and coaches and entrepreneurs to share their insights for the expansion of collective consciousness. And today, my guest is Shelby Avann. Hello, Shelby.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming. And I will read a bit about Shelby before we start. Shelby Avann is an intimacy coach and healer. She's a relationship and intimacy coach, and she helps women to create deep emotional intimacy in their relationships, to heal codependency and loneliness. Shelby loves blending the realms of spirituality and science in her coaching and healings. She's especially passionate about the topics of sex, nervous system regulation, attachment styles, and energy. I love that. And really, the question I'm going to ask you, Shelby, today is why do we need intimacy?
We need we need intimacy because if we don't have it, we really can't be close to ourselves or others. We don't really truly know ourselves. We just, we won't be able to truly know or let others know us either. So our relationships can really suffer if we don't have intimacy.
Yes, they can suffer. And I think this
Hmm.
is something that is um, is interesting because there's intimacy with our own self
Hmm.
and there's intimacy with others.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between the two when you're working with your clients? Which one starts first? How do you take them through the steps so they really come to understand why? Why can't I be on my own? Why do I need I might as well be on an island with, what is the difference between being on our own and having that really deep connection of trust, of understanding, of love with another?
Hmm.
How do you take them through the steps? What's the difference between being on their own, that intimacy with self, which is valuable, very valuable, and then
Hmm.
intimacy with others?
Hmm. Well, we could actually use the idea of the like if you were alone on an island kind of thing. So the way that I would walk someone through this is we always start with your needs first. That's what we'll start to talk about. Because if you don't understand what your needs are, you're not going to be able to give them to yourself. And again, so if we use the island reference, if you're alone on an island, you're very quickly going to know what your needs are. And they're going to be very basic at first. So, you're alone on an island. I need food. I know I need that.
Mm,
And survival instincts will start to come in, but then you'll start to realize that something that you're really, really missing once you're able to get those, body needs met,
mm,
is that you need connection. Like, I miss this. I want that. Where can I get that? And then you'd have to learn how to give it to yourself if there's no one else there.
mm.
And to be honest, I think COVID kind of taught us that because everyone got very, very isolated from it. So
Yes.
we either learned how to do that or we started to feel more and more lonely and disconnected because we weren't able to understand ourselves and meet our needs. So being able to start to express boundaries is something that's really important too. So if we don't know what our own boundaries are, what our limitations are, what we like or don't like, we can't express those. And that comes in the form of, just boundaries, how you want to be treated, but also in a sense, especially if we're talking about physical intimacy, then that can be about consent. And that's a really, really
Mm,
important conversation to be able to have and to be able to express to others. So that's kind of where some of my stuff starts to also blend here, because I really like to discuss um, intimacy on an emotional scale, but also when it comes to sex, because those are super vulnerable conversations and they're really important and really, really healing when we can do them right. Um, and then so from there, then we also, it's not necessarily all in this order, but then we'll work on nervous system regulation. And we might
mm,
do some somatic practices. If people are interested in doing energy healing, they can do Reiki. They can ask me to do a Reiki session as well. And we can do something like that, which is very good for the nervous system. We co-regulate with each other when I'm doing a Reiki healing session on someone. And it can give a lot of really beautiful insight as well, because I get a lot of messages when I'm doing my healing. So
mm,
that's kind of what it can look like at the
mm.
base, at the structural level.
Yes, yes. And the
Mhm.
nervous regulation is key
Mhm.
because many of us really have come from a place where we did have some difficulty with relationships that were meant to be loving.
Mhm.
And when we've had those kinds of trauma with, with regards to those close, intimate relationships,
Mhm.
we become quite dysregulated and we get triggered. The very idea of intimacy may be a trigger. So I think
Mhm.
I love that third point about never, really learning to, feel a little bit more at ease within the body. That is so important. Do you have a definition for intimacy? What is intimacy?
I would say that it's simply knowing yourself. That's it. It's very, very simple. Being able to know yourself and being able to share
Mm,
your true self with others.
I love that.
Hmm.
Because I think it all starts from within us.
Hmm.
And when we know what we want, when we know what makes us happy, what makes us fulfilled, when we know what things we want to set up as boundaries, we can communicate. But
Hmm.
we cannot communicate what we do not know.
Exactly.
So I do love that it's starting from knowing our own self, and it's a journey
Hmm.
because the self we were last week may not necessarily be that much. There's so much changing within us and around us. So that's changing self, knowing that changing self
Hmm.
is, and accepting that changing self is key.
Hmm.
And I wanted to just make sure we had covered that point, why we need it. Why do we need to relate to others? What is the what is the difference between having a relationship that is not intimate and one that is? What are the signs that we can look out for when we are
Hmm.
not in that relationship that is going to fulfill us?
So I find that those types of relationships, if we don't have intimate relationships, then we can feel anxious. We can feel lonely, even though we have people around us. We can be in certain patterns, like you can notice that you're people pleasing because you don't feel like you're worthy of their attention. Um, you can feel defensive. You can feel really unfulfilled. And I don't think really anyone wants any of those things.
Yes,
I think people
yes,
want to feel good and safe and seen and fulfilled and passionate, loved. And if we have intimacy, then we can do that. We can feel that.
yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
there's something about being complimented as well. There
Mhm.
there are certain traits that we have, and intimacy is not for me. I don't think it necessarily means connecting with somebody who is the same as you in
Mhm.
terms of the interest that you have. Some things could be the same, but um, there are certain things that need to be present in a relationship for there to be intimacy. And you mentioned communication, you mentioned
Mhm.
boundaries. And, these are the kind of things that I know those factors are really key when it comes to choosing a partner for intimacy. So I want us to get really practical. So you're friends with someone and
Hmm.
you are developing a friendship or you've been dating. And what are the signs to look out for to tell you this can? Because I know that there's a lot of um, there's a lot of sensing that we have to do in order to decide whether this relationship has commitment or not.
Hmm.
It is one thing for us to be compatible with somebody, it's another thing for them to be ready for a committed, intimate relationship. We can have
Hmm.
people we chat with, people we go out for drinks with, but those are not intimate relationships. They're
Hmm.
relationships that we need to feel trust, we need to feel understood, seen. Those are deeper relationships. How do we begin to sense, to know whether we're in a relationship that can be considered to be intimate? After we have established that we need intimacy, because the first thing is to establish that, okay, I'm ready. I'm
Hmm.
ready for an intimate relationship.
Hmm.
And understanding what that kind of relationship entails is first thing. And
Hmm.
then how do you know if the relationships that are around you can develop to be intimate relationships?
Hmm. Well, one of the things that I've really found in figuring out whether or not I'm going to be able to have an intimate relationship with someone is actually really getting in tune with my body and noticing whether or not I feel solid and grounded or whether I feel anxious and really nervous. I don't think it should be nervous. I feel like you should be, there's like nervousness, anxiety, and there's excitement.
Mm,
So if you're excited to see someone, that would be a good feeling.
mm,
But if you're feeling nervous or you're feeling anxious, then I feel like you're going into a place where you feel like you're not safe with
mm,
them and you're going to go into a pattern of protection. So whatever that looks like for you. So that might be people pleasing, which is basically like a fawn response and when you're in a dysregulated state, or you're going to be more protective. You're not going to be as open and vulnerable, which would be leaning a little bit more towards like an avoidant um, type of attachment style. I also do attachment styles. I didn't touch on that yet, but that's
mm,
something else. So more dismissive, pushing people away. Um, but yeah, you'll won't basically your body will feel a little bit more like there's electrons bouncing around everywhere. If you're not feeling safe with a person, and you
mm,
won't be able to vulnerably share and really show up as your true self. So it's like a body first thing that I usually notice. Um, in conversation, other things that I would look for are you both equally sharing and listening and really, really listening, not like, um, I've just shared something and they're like, yeah, that, and this is what's happened to me, blah, 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 blah. Like it needs to be a response where they really, really hear you and are able to, not like, I think there's a part of relating where it's like, I understand this because of my experiences too. Um, but it still needs to feel good. It needs to feel like you have been seen and understood and heard. And if you have this moment of being like, oh, like it just doesn't feel good, then you're not getting that from that person.
mm,
Um, because people can be vulnerable in a sense, but still not take other people into consideration. And it could be like an emotional dump that's happening. So
mm,
like this person's so vulnerable with me, they shared so much. But if you're the only one listening, and there's not an even exchange happening there, then that's kind of like pretty telling as for whether or not that's going to be a consistent pattern throughout that relationship. Um, in saying that, you can also always communicate and say, hey, this is something that I'm noticing. And like, I'd really, really like to be able to actually um, also share. And I've kind of had a hard day. So I appreciate you vulnerably sharing, but it's kind of a lot for me right now. I'm open to talking about it. Just it needs to close for now. We can pick it up later. Can I have a turn at sharing? And then depending on how they react and what they can give to you, like you can ask for a lot of stuff. So say, just had that conversation, say, I don't really want advice for this. I just really need to share about what's going on for me
mm,
and see if they can do that. Or do they they don't know how to do that and they give advice afterwards anyway, even though you've asked, this is a need that you were asking for to be met. And if they aren't able to do it, then again, that's kind of like a telltale sign of, oh, okay, this person doesn't know how to do that. And then you can make a decision of, well, like, am I willing to continue and maybe try a few more times, reiterate it, and see if this will change, and it could be like a learned skill for them, or I'm not feeling this. I don't think this is something that's going to change.
Mm.
Because you can
Uh,
even practice that multiple times in one conversation potentially too.
I think that's so powerful. I love the way you said you have to check in with yourself first
Hmm.
to know whether this is the right one, to know whether this is the right direction, that self check in, and then ongoing, the reflection. How are they matching us? Because there is that self awareness. This is about our own self awareness,
Hmm.
about how we can understand that this is all starting from us. And we are the ones that are going to hold the intentions and craft whatever it is that's reflecting back to us. What do we do with the reflection? Do we use it to walk away? Do we use it to communicate? And I love the way you are presenting this from the perspective of an empowered being,
Hmm.
because that is who we are. We are beings where when we get the reflection, what do we do with that reflection? We're not victims. We
Hmm.
can decide to communicate, we can decide to forgive and move on, because there is that saying about how marriage is about the endless forgiveness, you know, just
Hmm.
about continuing to, um, whatever the reflection is, you are wanting to not hold judgment. And because we not no one is perfect, no one is,
Hmm.
there are lots of things that come up against us in our intimate relationships, where we see a reflection that is not exactly takes, putting us in the best light.
Hmm.
And it's about what do we do with those reflections.
Hmm.
If it's, if we feel that this is too toxic and we are too dysregulated, taking a pause, sometimes we have to walk away, and sometimes we
Hmm.
have to forgive and actually communicate. This is not the way I would prefer this to be. And then seeing what comes back to us when we do that. And it's a kind of a game, and it's got to be exciting. This is not about us forgetting who we are. That is
Hmm.
so key, isn't it?
Hmm.
That in these intimate relationships, there needs to be no judgment, but we mustn't forget who we truly are in the
Hmm.
process of forgiving and tolerance and endurance and all of that stuff. Because nobody is perfect, and we will always get that reflection that is not exactly the best life,
Hmm.
um, that will trigger us. And it's about what do we do with those reflections? How do we regulate ourselves? Do we
Hmm.
stay in that environment? Do we walk away? And if we do stay, what are we doing with it?
Hmm.
Because those relationships grow. Relationships grow. In intimacy is a journey. Would you say it's a journey, Shelby?
Of course it is. And I think with all the things that you're saying there too, repair is the thing that builds more and more intimacy. So if you guys are able to, whether it's a like romantic relationship with your family or with your friends or with someone at work, um, the way that you are able to repair relationship with one another, if it's done successfully and communicate whatever it was that went wrong, how you guys were feeling, and then both people take accountability and for their parts, and then hear and take action on whatever it is that needs to be done with that. So, I need to hear you more. I didn't feel like, whatever the situation is, then that helps to build an intimacy and more trust,
Mm,
not
yeah.
only in one another, but also in yourself, because you've both spoken up for what it is that you need. So now you know that you can trust yourself even more, because you're not going to allow something that bothered you to go to the wayside.
Mm, mm.
Hmm.
Love that. What made you go into this, Shelby? I would love to know your background, because a lot of the times I find that those of us who really become really focused or pay attention to intimacy, we must have been through something. or a
Mhm.
journey that we did not understand what intimacy was, or we were felt completely disconnected. I would
Mhm.
love to know your journey and how you came to this place.
Okay. So, mm, uh, so for me, again, intimacy very much does go alongside with sexuality for the way that I teach and the way that I'm empowered and like move towards it. So, um, I've I've always had this pull towards like the full circle of reproduction. So whether it's actually about like sex and sexuality or whether it's about bringing life into the world, I've always been pulled to that stuff. So before I was doing coaching, I was actually an equine midwife. So I was bringing baby racehorses into the world, and I loved doing that. Um, but I also really loved learning about again sex and sexuality and energy and realizing that that's a different level of intimacy as well to work with the energetic fields of people and even like in something like sex you're definitely mixing energies together and blending and needing to understand how we can work with them in our bodies too. So um, what kind of happened for me was my parents' relationship like exploded when I was a young adult, and I it just felt really bad. It felt very bad. It felt like for everyone involved, it felt very disconnecting. I felt very lonely and in a lot of pain. Um, and so I needed to find a way to um, get out of that pain. And then as I was doing that, I just started to learn more about myself. So I that intimacy with self really started happening. It was very much more on like a spiritual and energetic level at first. And then I started doing more personal growth work, started looking more into the sexuality side of things, attachment styles, and things like that. And I started learning more about myself with, I don't know, that's just like the journey that it took me on. There was romantic relationships along the way that also definitely showed me um, where I would lose myself.
Mm,
And uh, there was one pretty tough one. More about a year ago that really put me into a deep dive. Maybe it's 2 years ago now. Deep dive into that work for myself because I remember specifically thinking at one point in time that um, if this person left me, I didn't know what I would do with myself, and I recognized how um, bad that thought was
mm,
for my well-being in general. So it's like I need to do something about that. So I did. So I started learning more, and that's where the attachment theory side of things started coming in for me. And and then it that kind of just brought everything all together in honesty, because I found that with the energy healing, there were still gaps of why I don't know, I didn't understand why certain things were happening, and I couldn't help my clients fully. Like I give them certain answers, but not all of them. I felt like I was leaving myself and my clients with more questions than answers, kind of thing. So as I started bringing the attachment theory into it, I was like, I actually have the answers for you now.
mm,
I know why you're not feeling good. I know why these emotional things are bothering you. Like I see that there's core wounds happening here. I see there's a certain pattern, that there's a nervous system dysregulation thing. There's a like whatever what is. Um, I could actually help them if they wanted to go on that journey
mm.
with me.
That's powerful. I love your bravery, your
Thank you.
courage, because it takes courage for us to decide that it stops here.
Mhm.
This is I'm going to change the way I relate to others and the way others relate to me. I'm going to change my status quo. It takes a long time for us to come to that place where we are really committed to making a difference in the way that we relate to ourselves and to others.
Mhm.
And it's hard work. It must have taken a lot of hard work. And I do commend you for that. And I do appreciate you. I would love to hear a lot more about the attachment theories,
Okay.
how you
Okay.
use that in your work, because I know there are four types of attachment, or is it five
There's
types of
four. Yeah.
that
Mhm.
that we do tend to develop in our relationship, and knowing what these attachment theories are can really help us to determine whether we are in a toxic or an intimate, a beautiful intimate relationship. And I think that
Mhm.
would be helpful for our audience.
Okay, sure. So yeah, there are four types of attachment styles. The first one being secure. So this is a very regulated type of human who is able to express what their needs are. Um, they're not usually super anxious. They're not going to make a whole lot of stories about what things mean or whether people like them or, say, oh, they're doing this for this reason. They're just going to ask. They're going to be quite straightforward and say, hey, what's going on? I noticed XYZ is happening. They're going to be strong in their boundaries. They're not really going to people please. These are just like really, really solid human beings.
Mm.
Then there's the anxious. So the anxious attachment style is they have like a core wound of feeling very abandoned or unlovable. That would kind of be their top type of wounding structure. And with that, they become it's like anxious. They're anxious. That's kind of how they present. So it's kind of like this very needy, very grabby type of energy, always needing to be um, very close, very in contact, very like they don't know how to emotionally regulate themselves. They do that through other people. So that's the skill that they need to learn is how to emotionally regulate. Um, and they'll have a lot of like stories of people are going to leave me and I'm not worthy and they'll people please. And those will kind of be some of the general patterns that happen with an anxious attachment style. And I'll push people away because they're so needy and grabby. It's just like it's too much all the time, too much like pay attention to me type energy. Then there's the dismissive avoidant. So these this attachment style, core wound their biggest core wound would be that they're defective. So they really think that something is wrong with them because they usually have been shown that, they might make a bid for affection and emotional connection and they're not going to get it. So they start to rely on themselves and they're just kind of like, you know what? I'm just not going to be super vulnerable with you. They're not really going to be able to receive a whole lot of love, affection, anything. Like you could offer to pay for something, and they'll be like, no, like I've got it. Thanks. No, I don't want to owe you. Um, and you'll feel like a distance with them. They just won't really want to let you in. But they're also very anxious on the inside. They just don't really show it. They kind of go into this mode, like their dysregulation mode for me is a little bit more, I feel it's more like freeze.
Mhm.
So they'll shut down and go into like a little hidey hole and not come out for a while because they need to regulate themselves. And they just can't deal with people. And then there is the fearful avoidant. So usually that's what I've become or insecure from, I've healed from. And fearful avoidant is a pendulum between the two types of attachment styles. So with the fearful avoidant, I think their biggest wounding is probably that of betrayal. Like I will always be betrayed and I can't trust. And so with that, that means that they want these very intimate connections with people. But if they get too vulnerable too fast, they really feel seen and they get scared. So they kind of, I guess this is my experience, can be maybe a tad more, maybe come off secure at the beginning, but then as they kind of get a little, they feel more close to the people that they've got around them, they might get a little bit more anxious. And then um, some conflict might happen, and then they'll set a boundary and take a lot of space. And then if the person doesn't respond back in an appropriate manner, then they might get anxious again and
Mm.
then push away again, depending on what happens. So it's this very like swinging back and forth type of thing between like I love you, I hate you situation, or I love you and I'm scared of you. Um, But it's just that I want to be able to be close to you, but I just don't know if I trust that.
Mm,
And so it's kind
mm,
of like come forward and then, ooh, I don't know. So there's a lot of that with the fearful avoidant. And that one I find can be, that one and the dismissive avoidant I find can be very misunderstood.
mm.
Mhm,
Sometimes we try to be intimate
mhm,
with those who are not ready for intimacy,
mhm,
who are not
mhm,
ready to give us, to hold that space, who are not ready to meet us halfway, who are not ready for us.
mhm,
And when that reflection comes to us, because I always think that these reflections are there for a reason, and there may be a part of us that needs to heal, needs to grow, and we need to give ourselves time to do that.
mhm.
But trying to really enjoy intimacy in these kinds of situations, or what is your perspective on when, as a person, you come into a relationship and you see that this relationship has this type of attachment style,
Mhm.
and you're trying to be intimate in that setup? What do you advise those who are in those situations to do?
Well, a lot of people are in those situations, and it's because
Mm,
both sides of the coin, both people need to do the work, right? So the thing that's actually kind of beautiful about these relationships is that usually it's like the anxious with the avoidant, or the fearful avoidant can, depending on who they're with, switch one way or the other. So if they're with a more avoidant person, they'll be a little bit more anxious. If the person they're with is more anxious, then they'll be more avoidant. But what it's basically doing is it's calling both people forward on either side to do the things that they're not good at doing. So if it's an anxious person, the avoidant person is actually going to force them to emotionally regulate, because if they take space, that person's not accessible for them to emotionally regulate with. And then with the avoidant, they're going to be called forward to connect more with the anxious, because the anxious wants that more. And it's a call forward to say, like, hey, this connection is okay and this is safe. But it does require both people to be able to work on that together. So um, it's not, I don't feel like these relationships are something you can avoid. Like, if you are an insecure attachment, the likelihood of you actually choosing a secure person is very unlikely. So until you start to do the work, you are going to be called into these relationships because they're asking you to do the work, to change, to empower yourself, but also the other person, because you can grow together. It just depends on whether or not, like you said, they're ready. Because you don't want to stay in a relationship if they aren't willing, able, and ready to do that. And even sometimes in doing the work together, you still might not be right or ready, because it just depends on how much work there actually is to do. You can do the work in relationship. You can also do the work out of relationship, and it doesn't have to be in a romantic relationship. You can do the
mm.
work with your family or your friends, or and anyone really, because you could even people please with people you hardly know, right? So you could just start to practice fixing some of those patterns with people at the grocery store if you want to. You don't need to be in a romantic relationship to be able to work on this.
I love that. It takes awareness,
Hmm.
for us to really know that, okay, this attachment is not secure,
Hmm.
it's not loving, it is a reflection of what is within me. I need to grow. Can I grow with this person or not? Are they going to meet me halfway or not? And being really honest with ourselves. I think being really honest with ourselves and knowing that we are not victims is really important.
Hmm.
And we can be intimate with so many people around us. We can be intimate with a book sometimes.
Hmm.
We can be intimate with our sisters or brothers, because
Hmm.
it's really about relationships that give us a sense of safety, a
Hmm.
sense of love. And it's
Hmm.
got to be a relationship of a high frequency. That is what intimacy is. It's that
Hmm.
loving higher frequency. And sometimes we have to work hard for it, and sometimes it's there. But I think it's important for us to be honest when we don't have it. Because
Mhm.
sometimes we think that toxicity is intimacy.
Yeah, well, because it's the normal. So if that's what
That's
people
what
have grown up
we're
with,
conditioned. Yes, we're
yeah.
conditioned to think that, just because we're punching each other out, this is intimacy. We are close. This is what closeness is all about. But
Yeah.
no, it's definitely there's a difference between toxicity and
Mhm.
intimacy. And I
Yeah.
really wanted us to really get to that today. And I
Mhm.
really appreciate that. I do want to read a section, a little bit from my book, Daily Soul Bytes. This is the section on intimacy. And Daily Soul Bytes is really is a book that's on Amazon now, and it's talking about the higher perspectives of the higher self. This is about love, about how we can become much more familiar with the different perspectives of our higher self, and then we can begin to practice that and really achieve our best outcomes from this place of love. So this is intimacy. Intimacy starts with our own self, being comfortable with yourself, with ourself, with our inner being, allows us to open up freely with another. Taking the small steps every day to accepting our own self even more unconditionally goes a long way in deepening intimacy with another. Intimacy is a willingness to step into the abyss of not knowing, to surrender to a powerful belief that says this experience and that experience is for us and is a good one. Intimacy, getting closer, is how we grow and expand. This expansion is what our soul desires. There's a lot of joy we experience in intimacy as we learn to surrender. This surrender is a key aspect in our scaling through the unknown in all areas of our lives. So that's a bit on intimacy from my book, Daily Soul Bytes. And it's exactly what we've been talking about. It is about knowing self. It's about coming to understand how the soul desires this. There is that intrinsic need to be intimate with another because we are relational beings. And I love the way that Shelby has really broken this down into the attachment theories and how we can come to understand when we are not having intimacy in our lives, and how we can come to develop it and know ourselves enough to create it in our own lives as the empowered beings that we are. Tell us about the programs that you run. How, if I was a client and I came to you, what what would you do? Why would we work together for me to really understand what intimacy means or why I need intimacy or how to become much more intimate in my present relationships?
Okay, so I do have two types of programs. So you can do one-on-one coaching with me or group coaching. I offer both. And in either case, it's a 3-month program, a 12-week program. And it basically talks about a lot of what we've kind of discussed in here, just week by week. So we start off with being able to understand needs, go through the boundaries, the core wounding, step by step, and like practical tools, as well as that nervous system regulation stuff. So it becomes this very embodied work that we get to do. And then it fast tracks you into being able to become a lot more secure, a lot faster versus if you were doing it on your own. It's like the fast tracked way of going about creating intimacy as well as a predominantly secure attachment style for yourself.
Mm,
So yeah, so you get that intimacy with self and some really, really beautiful relationships in your life as you progress through the
yeah,
program. Mhm.
brilliant. Because I think we have to get okay with getting help.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we want to push through these things, and it's okay if we are not in embedded patterns, because
Mhm.
sometimes we do find ourselves in embedded patterns of toxic relationships.
Mhm.
I've been there, so it's
Yeah.
important for us to feel okay about getting help.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and just realizing that, you can do the work on your own. Of course you can if you want to. It usually just takes a lot longer. And then if you keep repeating the same patterns and you're tired of it, then just, get some help. Get some help to do it and break the pattern faster.
so thank you so much, Shelby. Thanks for sharing your expert perspectives with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate being on. It was great.
Where can people find you when they want to connect with you, Shelby?
So they can find me on my website, which is shelbyavann.ca. So Avann is my last name. And then my Instagram is Intimacy Mistress. So they can find me there as well.
I love that. Intimacy mistress. Oh,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then actually on my website too, I forgot to mention this. So I do have a freebie that's on there, which is it's an intimacy checklist. So it has columns for emotional intimacy as well as for physical intimacy. So you can download that for free and get that checklist, which I think is really can be really, really helpful.
Yes, definitely. I will definitely advise our audience to get that checklist. And it's
Hmm.
free. That's perfect. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Shelby. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I would like to thank our audience and remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share these videos far and wide so more of this content can really, get out there as much as possible. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daily Soul Bytes Show. Bye bye.